Hello everyone, welcome back to this lecture. In our previous lecture, we have talked about history of computers. In this lecture, we will be talking about the generations of computers. How are the generations divided? How many generations are there? And what is the present generation that is going on? So, let's start this lecture. To begin with, first of all, we will be talking about how many generations are there. There are total 5 generations: the first generation, second generation, third generation, fourth generation, and the fifth generation. So, in total number, we are having 5 generations in which we have faced plenty number of problems and we have also solved those problems in the upcoming generations. So, let's start with the first generation. First generation. The first generation computers were started in the period of 1946 to 1959. Okay, so the first generation was the period we can talk about is 1946 till 1959. They were made up of vacuum tubes. So the first computers, they were made up of vacuum tubes. They were very large number. They consume a heavy power consumption. These computers could calculate in milliseconds. So these computers were able to calculate the operations in milliseconds. These were very big in size. The weight and was about 30 tons. So they were very huge. The computers in the first generation were very huge. They almost weigh about 30 tons. And they also consumed a very large amount of energy due to vacuum tubes, because vacuum tubes consume a lot of energy. So that's why large amount of energy consumption was one of the major, we can say, drawback of this generation. Moving towards the second generation, let's see. These computers were between the period of 1959 till 1969 and were known as second generation computers. So, the second generation computers, the period was of 1959 till 1965, and this period was known as the second generation computers. These generation computers are based on transistors. So, this generation was based on transistor and our first generation was based on vacuum tubes. The main advantage of these generation computers was they provide better speed, could calculate data in microseconds. So, transistors were small in number and size and they provide better speed so that the computer could calculate calculations in microsecond rather than milliseconds. These computers were used for specific purpose because cooling systems were required as well as constant maintenance of the computers was needed. So, these computers were only used for specific purposes. Why? Because they required heavy cooling system as well as there was regular maintenance was required. So, our second generation was based on transistors. Moving towards the third generation. The third generation computers belong to the period of 1965 till 1971. So, the third generation period was from 1965 till 1971. These computers was based on IC. We can also say integrated circuits. So, this generation we can say was totally based on integrated circuits. It reduces the size of computer. Along with it, it improves the performance of the computer. In our first two generations, the size of the computers were very huge. But when integrated circuits were introduced, the size of the computers reduced and hence also increased the performance too. New input devices such as keyboard, mouse were introduced, but IC chips were difficult to maintain as well as air conditioning were required. So in this generation, new input devices were introduced like the keyboard, the mouse, and these computers were also very difficult to maintain because air conditioning were also required, because IC would heat up. So for that particular thing, cooling was needed. So air conditioning was also required in this generation of computers. If we talk about the fourth generations, the fourth generation period was of 1971 till 1980, and this period was known as the fourth generation of computers. So the period was of 1971 till 1980. These generation computers are totally based on microprocessors. So this generation was based on microprocessors. And the main advantage was that they required very less amount of maintenance. Talking about the previous one, maintenance was required. But over here, when microprocessors were introduced, very less number of maintenance was required. The intervals of maintenance was very less as compared to the previous generations. Even GUI technology was introduced, which was offering better comfort for the users. So, you know that GUI is a graphical user interface that makes the users more comfortable rather than using the command line. And if we talk about the fifth generation, the present generation you're talking about is the fifth generation. You can see that it is more reliable, works faster, and it's available in different size and even unique features. This generation is based on ULSI, that is ultra large scale integration technology, resulting in production of microprocessor chips having 10 million electronic components. In this, they have minimized everything so compact, making it having where a microprocessor chip is having almost 10 million electronic components. So this was all about the generations of computers that we are looking. The first generation was totally about focused on vacuum tubes only. So it consists of vacuum tubes consuming a very large power. The second generation was of transistors, in which we need regular maintenance was required and heavy air conditioning. We talk about the third one. The third one was of integrated circuits. Integrated circuits were also a great one, but it required same in air conditioning and a large amount of maintenance. We talk about the fourth one is the microprocessors, and we coming to the fifth one, which is the present one, having microprocessors but in a complex way, having integrated circuits in the microprocessors. So this is all about of today's lecture. In this lecture, we have completed the generations of computers. And in our next upcoming lecture, we will be talking about the classifications of computers. Okay. So thank you. So in this today's lecture, we have completed about the generations of computers. And in our upcoming lecture, we will be talking about the classification of computers, how the computers has been classified, on which basis they are being classified. So till now, thank you.